Well, we have the pleasure of being the last panel of PTC'23, so thank you for sticking around. Appreciate that. And I'm joined by some fantastic people on stage. It's a pleasure to be here, but I'm going to turn it over to Jim Masterson to give a little update on his company and introduce himself, and then we'll go to Bob and the other Jim. We have two Jims, but we'll figure it out.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm Jim Masterson, CEO of LightEdge. My company's based out of Des Moines, Iowa, and just so you know, it's probably 25 degrees there right now, so thank you for inviting me to this. This is fantastic. I'm not sure I'm going to go back to that. But we have been in business for over 20 years. I've been the CEO for about 18 of those, 19 of those. And when we first got there, our plan was to transform a networking company, a business ISP, into a cloud company. And we've been kind of executing on that vision ever since. Real estate for us was a must-have so that we could effectively have the quality facilities that we needed to host our private clouds, our compliant clouds. So we today, fast forward today, we've got 11 data centers in 8 different markets, mostly in the Midwest, most recently with an acquisition in San Diego that came with 3 facilities and a similar cloud strategy. Our long-term strategy is to continue to acquire. Our investor is GI Partners, been a great investor. We made 2 acquisitions last year. We'll probably make 2 more this year, and we continue to grow, and we're going to keep doing it. So that's our story.
Hello, good morning. I'm Bob DeSantis. I'm the CEO of 365 Data Centers. 365 Data Centers operates 20 data centers, primarily edge markets. 17 of them are Chicago and East. They all serve as very important regional network hubs. So we really focus on network-centric data center services. In addition to that, we operate 93 points of presence outside of our data centers that constitute a national fiber network that goes all the way out to the Pacific Northwest and all the way down to the southeast portion of Florida and up to upstate New York. The data centers are populated by over 100 carrier customers that have over 310 of their own carrier POPs across the platform. We also offer a suite of virtual and cloud services, direct on-ramps to the public cloud, and serve 1,700 carrier content and enterprise customers.
All right, aloha, and thank you for getting me out of Denver, Colorado, which is having a blizzard, I believe, based on my Ring video I saw. So I'm the president and CEO of Involta. We're celebrating our 15th birthday in business. We are a data center company with 12 data centers across the US. Our niche is secondary markets, and really enterprise focus, so targeting middle market companies and enterprises, infrastructure, obviously data centers, cloud services. We have 44,000 fiber miles, so really infrastructure and the services around those to really help enterprises transform and enable their clients. We grew up in verticals like healthcare, manufacturing, and financial services, which are pretty complex and demanding, compliance-wise, security-wise. So I think that's really helped our business gain its niche in the marketplace.
Great, thanks guys. I appreciate the intros. It's good to see some new faces at PTC. So appreciate you all coming. There's been a fairly significant move and shift within enterprise clients today. A lot of them are thinking more about cloud. They're thinking more about how are they going to shift their IT environments. And so I just want to get your perspective of where do you see sort of enterprise evolving in 2023 and beyond? And why don't we start the other Jim at the end?
Yeah, you bet. You bet. So, we're seeing a lot of high density, the applications these days, whether it's AI or ML or AR, VR driven. I think you look at the amount of data and compute necessary, and the chipsets are getting more dense and hotter. So I think that's a big trend we're seeing with enterprises. Just to solve a business problem, whether it's patient outcomes in healthcare or it's manufacturing better, cheaper, faster, and putting smart technology into plants. That's really driving that trend that we're able to serve, I think, both as an industry. But I think you're going to see that, and with that comes connectivity. So we see really twofold as just higher density, requiring direct liquid cooling, some of those solutions, as well as just the connectivity and peering and be able to move that data as needed.
Bob,
Next?
please.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, as far as the enterprise go, it's been a pretty interesting life cycle for those of us who go back to before 2010. Everybody was moving to colo and then managed services and then, cloud, which was really just shared managed services. But from my perspective, and I like to look at enterprise customers as, 25,000 a month in MRR and more. And certainly when you get over $40,000 a month, the whole concept of cloud first plays into the equation. So, I'd say where we are in the life cycle is over the last 10 years, I think an awful lot of the cloud first decisions have not only been made, and now they've been revisited. And, I think what we are finding, to talk about verticals, financial services, healthcare, education, and some elements of high tech, who have made the colo first decision, or at least have decided what they're going to leave in colo, have been very sticky customers. We all know they're growing in terms of power usage, certainly in many cases in terms of deployments. But I think what we're also seeing over the last couple of years, and I see this for going into next year as well, a lot of those who have revisited their cloud first decisions, have determined to do one of two things. Either they come back for deployments at the edge for that hybrid workload where it's economically efficient for them, or they've developed their own cloud platforms. And as colo operators, we're more than happy to provide colo space and power to cloud platforms that our customers who first went to the cloud and then determined it was better to have on their own. And when you add, as Jim said, direct cloud on-ramps, and you're at the edge, and you have a robust network, to carry your customers where they need to go and to move that data that's growing exponentially. My view is that enterprise customers will continue to allow the colo aspect of the business to grow. And as Jim said, when you have that network to add to it and you have some virtual to add to it, you're going to make those buying decisions for those enterprise customers a lot more sticky in your co-location facilities.
To put a data point on that, Gartner just looked at and did a survey to find out how many workloads, and their data point is 85% of workload decisions are not optimized, that were made from 2020 before last year. So think about the opportunity for the industry. All those workloads need to be revisited.
And I think there's another, and Jim, we want definitely, I think one of the things Gartner also mentioned, I think of all enterprises, there's still a fairly, I think it's like 30 to 35% are outsourcing their entire IT infrastructure. So we're in the early innings in this.
Early
right?
days.
I mean, I think there's a huge uptick. But Jim, I don't want to steal your
No,
thunder.
actually, I agree with all of that. I think the only thing I would add to that is the idea of intentionality. I think in 2023, with this kind of macroeconomic situation, we still see customers making decisions to acquire digital project capabilities, but I think they've got a lens, or it's going to become more and more a lens on cost optimization, and also becoming more efficient for their end users from a differentiation standpoint. So I agree with these guys. I just think that the only thing I would add is that clients are getting much more measured about what they're doing with that digital project.
And this is great because I think we're getting into kind of where we want to talk about kind of the evolution of where enterprises and what they're buying. I think if we all, the four of us, started sort of in the pure colo business, right? It's been a fairly dramatic change. I think colo is obviously, as Bob mentioned, it's very relevant today. But the add-on is happening today. And I just want to talk a little bit more about the services that you're seeing that are beginning to influence changes in sort of enterprises. So as the buying patterns shift, what additional services are coming in? Is it just a pure colo, or I think it's more. It's more the cloud services, it's the security, it's the compliance. I mean, Bob, you mentioned a couple of fairly compliant, verticals. Finance, healthcare, education are very, very, sticky in terms of compliance. But Jim Masterson, we'll start with you
Okay.
here, and maybe just talk about kind of what additional services are coming in.
The thing that I'm seeing right now that is just top of mind is our ability to, if we're going to deploy different locations for workloads in a hybrid environment, you've got to be able to manage that hybrid environment. So for us, the obvious one that is on the kind of forefront is the extension into the premise. So the ability to not only manage, obviously, any of the clouds that are interconnected in our data centers together with whatever secondary sites from a co-location standpoint, but also reaching into premise and being able to manage that hybrid environment. So we are going up the stack in managed services. The trick is, from our perspective, is to not get too broad, because when you get too broad, you aren't very good at what you're doing. So, but those fairways of what you're going to deliver to that customer from a managed services standpoint are opening up. It's not quite as broad as kind of opening up the patient entirely and doing anything for all customers, but being very intentional again about how you open up those fairways from a managed services standpoint, and then do it with the ability with an eye on replication. Because if you're going to do it once, you would hope that you can do it dozens of times for future clients as well. So that's kind of how we're looking at it.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, and I think, you know, the replication aspect is super important. How do you get down to that repetitive nature of kind of what things are doing?
Yeah, I mean, you think in terms of, and I say this humbly speaking, when you step into client environments that are looking for very advanced DR or RACEs, and that stuff's complicated. And again, being very intentional about how you approach the market and deliver those services is just something you got to be real thoughtful of.
Bob, Dawson?
You know, I guess I'd look at it strategically in terms of the customer base. So you got to break it a little bit in half, right? So, you know, just to use my example before, 25,000 a month or more. You know, call that enterprise, you know, let's call it maybe 25,000 or less, you know, smaller enterprise. I don't want to say necessarily SME, but smaller enterprise. So, you know, for us, you know, we're primarily network-centric colo. You know, I think when we think about products and services that really drive or can diversify or impact buying decisions, we focus on the network elements for what I would say, the larger customer base. Why? Because if we can offer them, you know, access to 90 points of presence where they can connect with us and come in and we can broadcast their IP and we can connect them to 20 data centers and 89 other points of presence, or if they come in the data centers and go the other way, making sure that we're looking at those network elements. So whether it's the equipment, whether it's the routes, whether it's the capacity, having diversified type of services, pricing, you know, whether it be local or running somebody all the way across the country, those type of network services that you need to stay on top of your, you know, in terms of your speeds and feeds coming out of your equipment and your, you know, your arranged, transport. That impacts the decision whether somebody's going to use colo and or use network with you and or use cloud. So the network is less of the commodity than the colo. And again, network technologies don't change too often. But when they do change, you need to stay on top of them, and we spend a lot of time on that. So I'd say, you know, network revisions in terms of services and network elements within our control are very important. For the group, you know, say under 25,000, giving them that route to the cloud, because many of them come to you for colo, they come to you for basic managed services, and you have to have that route to the cloud. So what we do there is, you know, we keep Nutanix platforms, we keep, you know, traditional VM and NetApp and, you know, other kind of Cisco UCS type of platforms, because you've got to be able to cater to the various needs of those technicians who are taking it on. So again, the larger enterprises, I think the differentiation for us is, you know, having, you know, staying abreast of and, you know, staying state of the art in the network, and that's no easy task because we're not primarily a network company. And I think for the smaller SMEs, giving them that route to the cloud, because eventually they're going to get there. And you want to be able to, you know, continue to serve them if they were comfortable with your colo services, you know, as they go up the stack there.
Yeah, just a quick question on the network piece. And sorry, Jim, just wanted to pick up on that real quick. You know, I've seen, and I don't know if this is happening across the board in terms of the other, in your data centers as well, but the ask, there's sort of been this, 10 years ago was whether you're OpenIX certified, and then it sort of transitioned out of that. And then most recently it's been, really around ransomware. And then, but related to network, it's been, hey, are you SD-WAN capable? So I don't know if you're all getting that. And Bob, I don't know if that's happening a lot. But
Are you all getting what? What was the question?
SD-WAN
Yeah.
capable?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah,
We are,
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
I think it's probably
Yeah.
across the board,
Yep.
right? I mean, it's kind of a check the box in an RFP. Are you SD-WAN capable? Which is, 5 years ago, you weren't talking about that, right? So,
That's right.
but sorry, Jim, I just why don't we jump to you?
No, yeah, Tony, I think you said well at the beginning, we all started in the colo business, and
Yeah.
the buying habits of enterprise at that time is, hey, I don't want to be in the data center business. As a corporate company, we want to stick to what we do well in that outsourcing model, and things have changed. I think we've talked a lot about what those things are, but from our point of view, it really is where those workload and applications are going to, and people are realizing going into 2023, people aren't getting bigger IT budgets, but interestingly, it's not like COVID. Projects are not slowing down. It's just how do I get more efficient with my IT spend? So we're seeing that. I think Jim was right. Where we're really focused on, right now our fastest growing services are cloud, including disaster recovery, immutable backup as a service, all those types of cloud services, and cybersecurity. Those two by far are fastest growing businesses and should be. That complement all of our infrastructure offerings. But I think where the puck is going is exactly where Jim said. We're seeing demand. I'll give you a real example. Real customer, and they define the edge a little differently. Like, I feel like we're in the edge before it was cool, like Edge Volta, should be, right? Like we've been doing this for a long time. But what we see is, and this is a real customer, real situation, the hospital, and they've defined edge. They've put the same server equipment that you would put into a data center in little closets. They have 1,100 locations that they've done this at. Not only are they losing hospital revenue by taking up that space, but the amount of money they've spent to try to condition to actually, so that's where a company like Involta or LightEdge and Bob's company can help, because you need somebody who can actually put a better solution in place. There's tens to hundreds of millions of dollars. There's a much better way to do that. You tether it back to a data center that has low latency. You have ruggedized devices. You don't need to deploy IT people to 1,100 locations, and you can manage that remotely. I mean, that's the infrastructure play. That's where fiber and compute and storage and getting that balance of devices, and that's really happening. That hospital system we'll work with, and those are tens to hundreds of millions for the industry. So that's where the puck is going. How do you manage these applications as compute and storage at the edge? In hospitals, it's PAC system imaging, has to stay there right on the hospital. So you really have to solve for problems like that in manufacturing. And, I'll be darned if I let a manufacturing client build a data center in a manufacturing plant. Bad idea. Like, do not do that. But I think that's where the industry can help. Really think about those business problems that your clients are trying to serve. And that's where the buying patterns are going to be. It's a little early innings on some of this, but there's great opportunity there.
Yeah, I would add on to that. I completely agree with Jim. It's really interesting because for those of us that have been doing this a long time, you could start to think that maybe you're at the later innings of the game, or you're at the downside of an adoption curve, right? And in reality, we're just hitting that inflection curve right now with regards to the mass market adoption of what we're talking about here. So it's still incredibly exciting.
Yeah, and I think as we talked about, I mean, we're just in the early innings and stages of this adoption of full, transformation and move of the entire IT environment. I think you're getting pieces, but we should be seeing more and more of this over the next little bit. And as products sort of revolutionize and you transform your product set, it's going to totally change, right? And I think you're going to be able to say, okay, instead of we're going to take this little tiny piece, we're going to take the entire environment.
I get so excited about this particular topic because probably, 5 years ago or so, you'd start to see these IT organizations, which historically have been, these companies to a great extent, have been at the whim of whoever the VP of IT is or the manager of IT, and they basically, they were viewed as a little bit of a voodoo-oriented type of organization, and people C-levels just didn't want to reach into that piece of their organization and disrupt anything. It started with bringing on chief digital officers. And you started to see this evolution of the C-suite becoming something that added a title that reflected somebody with a new thought process. Now you fast forward 5 years later, it's a full-blown adoption.
Well, you know, one thing to add to that, from a perspective of a business whose majority of its customer revenue is today and probably will remain, you know, network-centric colo, you know, with managed services 30% or less. You know, and looking at the dynamics you're talking about, you know, you go back to 2007 through 2010, everybody's moving into colo, right? And, you know, then all of a sudden there was a shift towards, well, you know what, I got to refresh my infrastructure. I still want to own it, but I'd like to put it on an OpEx model. So you had co-location providers now starting to provide managed services, and really all you were doing were financing the equipment build. And then it was, well, you know, not only do I not want to put the CapEx up front, I really don't want to have so much management IT personnel. So can you actually manage the servers that I own, you know, that I'm financing through you? And all of a sudden now, you know, you're building your own staff to work within your own data center to manage those services. And then cloud, no offense, is really just the same people who wanted you to buy that equipment for them, but all of a sudden with technology changes, they could share that equipment built with VM, you know, virtual machines and things of that nature. And so then we moved to cloud. And what we're seeing a lot, we don't really deliver the service, but what we're seeing a lot is these same IT groups who used to ask you to manage everything down through the operating systems are now really looking for operators, if you can provide the whole thing, to bring them all the way down through the application layers and effectively be their outsourced IT department. And I just wonder, you know, as we progress on 5 to 10 years, I talk to Jim quite often, he's trying to steer a ship more to do managed services. I wonder if that managed service component is actually going to be an outsourced IT department. Right. You know, and you know, a whole different business model, really. Yeah. But the demand is there for that. Mm-hmm. You guys are probably seeing that more. But it's just amazing how this has progressed from how do I get colo out of the closets, you know, into somebody else's secure environment, to now, how can somebody actually run all my IT? And I just run help desks. Yeah. And
I want to switch gears a little bit because I think in 2022, and actually even before, but obviously it was very apparent in 2022, which was really around power cost and energy, which, you know, there was some fairly significant upticks. And I think if we traditionally looked at when we all started in this space, you looked for reasonable power, reasonable space, right? And there's less of an abundance of those because there's more and more data centers, which is great because we're supplying that service. But I think I want to just maybe start with Jim and just, Jim Masterson here. Talk a little bit about, you know, how did you mitigate sort of the power changes? Because I think you're in quite a number of markets, you all are, but, and how do you see it evolving maybe potentially from a go forward?
Well, that's a big topic because it is evolving and it's really complicated. But first thing I think we stepped into is we had to get really efficient in the facilities from a PUE standpoint. So, you know, big initiative on that from the jump. And today, you know, when you look at, and Jim, a lot of his assets are in similar type markets. I guess maybe one positive for us is we're in the bulk of Midwestern marketplaces. And so we, at least in a lot of our primary sites, we have power companies that have been very good to us. So we do pretty well. I mean, I think Iowa is probably, if not the lowest power rate in the country, it's certainly in the top 4 or 5. Now that challenge for us has gotten a lot more interesting when we acquired the San Diego company because of the California power rates. So we are looking at, this particular facility happens to have a massive parking lot that's completely unused. So we are looking at ways to, one, cool it differently with this technology called Icebox, literally Icebox technology. And the other thing we're looking at doing is what would it take to deploy a huge solar array in the parking lot. Now that's early stages though, right? So it's easy to think about that until you present the investment group with the price tag for doing some of these things and the business case to making that hunt. But we are looking at different ways to set us up for the future when it comes to the ongoing increases in price, especially in the California marketplace for us.
Bob?
Well, you know, obviously, there are regulated markets, there are deregulated markets. Massachusetts for us, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Michigan, all deregulated markets. The rest are regulated markets, so you're at the whim of what the utility charge is going to be for your utility class. So 2013 was the last year we saw a spike like this. And fortunately, it was a one-year spike, went away. There was really no need to think about passing through costs. Some did, some didn't. Those that did kind of took some grief the next year. Those that didn't, had happy customers. We got a little lucky, and there's always a little luck in the game, right, for 2022, and that sometime before August of 21, in our regulated markets, we were able to place very favorable contracts. I wish I had done them now for 2 or 3 years rather than just 22. But across the board in our regulated markets, I think we saw anywhere from 17 to 18% increases for sure. And and that got mitigated a bit, obviously, by the other markets where we got a little lucky, placing contracts before the spike. So what we did, after a lot of thoughtful consideration and believing that maybe we were at a new normal, because everybody had said going into the 21 year, anybody around the industry, was talking about, well, the first 4 months of the year, we're going to have the spike, and by May, things should go back to normal, meaning, the first half of 21. And when we got to May, that wasn't the case. In fact, people were projecting that the rest of the year would remain the same, and if you wanted to even place contracts for the following year, they'd even be higher. So we made a tough decision. We exacted an across-the-board temporary energy surcharge in June, with the explanation where we were and that we'd revisit it by year end. And it was really, just across the board. So if you took network or if you took a lot of power, everybody got it. And when December rolled around, and it looked like this was the new normal because everybody is projecting another 15% increase on average for next year, and that looks like for this year, and that looks like it could very well take place. We went out in December and turned a temporary surcharge into a permanent energy assessment, but got much more tailored. And said basically if you were taking our cloud or you were taking our network, you're going to have a little bit of a hit. Some of those actually might have gone down from the across-the-board general percentage. So it was a tough decision to make, but we are also subtenants in some of the larger hyperscale data centers just because of the way the business was built. And believe me, they were earlier than us making it permanent. So, so that's the way we handled it, Tony. And hopefully this current year, that won't need to be considered again. But you know what? We didn't get a lot of thank you notes, I can tell you that. We didn't get a lot of calls saying, thanks for doing this. But we did get cooperation. I think in this industry, people that put such a valuable asset with you want you to be strong. Yeah. And I think they understand, at least some of the larger enterprise customers. That was our experience.
Yeah, that's all I would add on. Our customers were very understanding. I think they, the media helps when they talk about inflation. And so everybody understands inflation, the impact, and that cost needing to be passed through. So we similarly did a pass-through and pretty uneventful. And I think, it's interesting because we're really thinking about sustainability and renewable energy. And as Jim said, that costs more. So I'm really interested to see the enterprise buying behavior, as utility prices change. When do you get to that point where you're willing to pay that premium, whether it's solar or hydro or that renewable energy source?
Yep. That's great. Are there any questions from the audience? Any questions at all? Okay, I have one really, because we got a few minutes, just a quick one. Obstacles for 2023 and just kind of thoughts on what you're thinking, how you're going to get around those. Maybe we'll start at the other end with the other.
Sure. Yeah, no, I think obstacles, like I said, I don't feel like, and believe me, we've talked to a lot of customers to see what their IT budgets look like. And I'd say enterprises, it's not like COVID. During COVID, it was a hard stop. We are not doing a project. We're not, our budgets got very different. And everyone's fully aware of the recession, looming recession, whether you think it's a slowdown or a full-on recession that's going to last a couple of years. So I feel, I think the challenge is just a little bit of that uncertainty as we go through the year, what really happens as the monetary policy continues to intentionally put us into a recession. What does that mean for companies? Every CEO needs to grow their company. And so I think for the industry, it's both a challenge but also an opportunity. How do we sell into helping them really grow their companies, fully outsource IT? I agree with Bob on that, great opportunity, but I think there are a number of ways we can help with that challenge. But I think that's the biggest challenge, just the uncertainty of the market and helping CEOs, CFOs, and ultimately the CIOs grow their businesses and continue to solve problems.
Now, I'm only going to respond to your obstacles question because you asked it, okay? But I think anybody out here who has been involved in running a business or managing it, look, that's what we get paid for, right? That's why we own these things. You got to manage through things. I mean, there's never been a year where there hasn't been something that you got to deal with. So, okay, energy was the big deal last year, maybe a little inflation. We get through it, right? I explained how we did it. Everybody might have done it differently. You get through it. If you're going to talk about an obstacle, I already referred to it a bit. I think energy costs, you already see them, are going to be slightly higher in some markets than last year. All right, so, if we mitigated that last year, at least we put some mitigation in the baseline of it, right? Last year, we saw inflationary increases in salary and wages, right, last year. Most of that in my industry or in my business came from the network and cloud engineers. Thank God these guys have more of them than me, I'm sure. But, because during COVID, we kept everybody. A lot of people that were on the ropes let everybody go, and now they got to hire everybody back last year, and they're offering everybody 20% increases. And, you got to deal with that. But that's over. That's over. You're going to have a lot of network personnel in the market, believe me, soon, and cloud personnel as well. So, I think interest rates, we all deal with that. But those are the obstacles. I've been saying, I hate to say it, I think I've been saying it for 13 years now. We are in the right industry at the right time, and it's been going on for a long time. You got, I think the last one I heard, I always track this stat, it's over 3 billion gigabits of data a day. 3 billion gigabits of data a day are being generated. And it has to be stored, it has to be computed, it has to be transported. And where are we? We're all there to do that. Yeah. So, we're very, very fortunate. We've been very blessed to be in an industry that's growing exponentially. So, those challenges, they got to be dealt with. But they're not going to get in the way of, continuing growth and in a very strong way, in my view. And I might be saying this 10 years from now. I mean, it just hasn't stopped.
Thanks, Bob. Jim?
I would just wrap up with my part. The supply chain issues are real. When you're thinking about back to that adoption curve issue, put yourself in our shoes, and what it looks like is if you own your data centers, you're having to make decisions around capital spend on what the adoption curve might be for colo versus the adoption curve for cloud. So we found ourselves, actually, we should have spent more. We had expansions going on in every one of our facilities, and in hindsight, the adoption curve for cloud went up in 2022. And we're consuming that inventory faster than we thought. So we've got more expansion on the horizon, but that supply chain issue is probably one of the biggest challenges for 2023.
No, agreed. First of all, thanks, Jim, Bob, and Jim. Appreciate you sharing all the thoughts.
Thanks, Tony.
And great PTC. Great to end on an awesome panel. So thank you very much, and look forward to seeing everybody in 2024. Thanks a lot.
Everybody.
Appreciate it.